It is only natural that we take advantage of tonight to speak about Tisha B'Av, about the Tzaimis. And instead of speaking about a specific limited sugi regarding Tisha B'Av, we'll have a general overview about the concept of fast days of Beis Yisrael. So there's a new kuntas that came out on various halachas of Tisha B'Av and the Tzaimis and Bein HaMeitzarim, which is for sale at the end of the shul. There's a lot of merchandise for sale there. And Rabbi Isaacson takes care of the sales, my dear friend and colleague. So tonight we will have a brief overview, the eagle's view about the Tzaimis. And we will have a short journey, and we plan to visit 28 destinations. So when you have a short trip and you want to visit 28 destinations, your guide will tell you you can't stay long at each of those destinations. We'll have to come back another time. So tonight we just briefly visit just to get an idea, and maybe sometime Kodesh Baruch Hu should give us a schus for Arichos Yom Vishonim. We'll have to revisit the various different sites, but we hope to briefly visit 28 destinations. Starting off with the Uraisa, Divrei Kabbalah, the Rabbanon, Minhag Ba'alma, and stories we find in Chazal, not Chiyuvim. And we will break down all the various Taniyos, 28 in number, into 4 categories. Lani Yizdaiti Yesh Arba Avois Betanis, and I'm not confusing with the first Mishnah in Bava Kama. We're not talking about Arbolis Nezikin, we're talking about Avois Betaniyos. So what are the Arba Avois of Taniyos? Lani Yizdaiti. And we will examine these assumptions. Tshuva, Ritzui, Avelos, and Zeichar. 4 different concepts, and all the Taniyos fit into one of those 4. We might have had this discussion in the past, but every time I go over it, there are so many new facets and new angles and ideas that it's always fascinating. So the most common one, and we will touch about 14, is tshuva. So one of the greatest gulas when you do tshuva, lechaper avoin, is fasting. And it is twofold. Fasting enhances the process of tshuva. Because when you're not busy with olam haza, and you're not busy with your own personal bodily pleasures, then you have more time and more feeling and more emotion to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is also as gula lechaper avoin. Because when we suffer and inflict pain and suffering on ourselves, that is as gula lechaporas avoinos. And the most basic of all the HaMeitzarim, the only one, not definitively the only one, there might be another one which will be the last one in today's shir. There might be another one that's midiuraisa. But there's one Tzayim that lekuli alm is midiuraisa. Ki b'yoyim hazeh yachaper elechem l'tayar eschem ekol chatoisechem lefnei Hashem titahoru, and that is the Tanis of Yoyim HaKippurim, which is definitely associated with tshuva, slicha v'kapora, and kaporos avoin. The same would apply to Erev Rosh Hashanah, which is found in the Poskim in Tov Kuf Pei Aleph. Erev Rosh Hashanah is because we can't fast on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah Yemei Din, Yemei Mishpat. It would be fitting to fast, but it's a Yom Tov. You can't fast on Yom Tov, and therefore we fast Erev Rosh Hashanah. And the Poskim bring that there are tzaddikim that fast Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Aseres Yemei Tshuva minus 4 days. Which are the 4 days you can't fast on Aseres Yemei Tshuva? So usually if you have 10 days, you're going to have a Shabbos amongst them. Yeah? So you have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, you have Shabbos and Erev Yom Kippur, which you can't fast. And that is why we have a minimum of Daled Yemei Slichos. Minimum Slichos is 4 days. Comes to compensate the 4 days of Aseres Yemei Tshuva in which we cannot fast. So that's number 3 associated with Kapora and Tshuva. Yom Kippur Cotton brought in the Magen Avraham Siman Tov Yud Zayin Shechan Ochar Achayim. Erev Rosh Chodesh is defined as Yom Kippur Cotton. So the Mekubolim say that Erev Rosh Chodesh once again is a day that's mesugal for Kaporas Avain. We could only assume that Yom Kippur Cotton is of the same nature as Yom Kippur Gadol. Otherwise, wouldn't be called Yom Kippur Cotton. Are you familiar with Bahab? Brought in Tov Tzadik Beis, once again in Tov Kov Samachet, Sheni Chamishi V'Sheni, coming after Sukkot and after Pesach. What is the source of that? Some Sefer Eov. Eov fasted. Shemu Chatu Bonai. After the festivals, Eov was afraid. When you eat meat and you drink wine and you're happy, and sometimes it might cause Chet V'Avoin. And that is the source of Tanas Bahab, which is once again brought in many sources in the Poskim. Is everybody familiar with Shoivavim? That comes in later generations. Be'ikar the Shlo and the Ari. So this is a concept that comes from the Mekubalim. The first 6 parshiyos in Chumash Shemos. Shemos va'eru boi b'shalach yisur mishpotim is Rosh Tevis Shoivavim. And that's the Posek Anubi, Shavu Bonim Shoivavim. And according to the Mekubalim, it has to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim and Geulas Mitzrayim and Golas Mitzrayim. Each and every person has his personal Golas Mitzrayim, and he needs to bring forth his personal salvation. And that is his closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is why these weeks have to do with tshuva. The Meiri has a sefer Chibur HaTshuva, and sometimes the Rishonim are very practical. More practical than some of the Mekubalim and later generations. The Meiri says, why do we fast on Shoivavim? Because it's the shortest days of the year. Winter, it's easier to fast. You don't have to fast till 9:30 by night. By 5 o'clock, it's already Tzeiz to Gehovim, and that's why they chose those weeks to fast. That's a very practical approach. But most of the Mekubalim say, those special weeks in which we read the Parshiyos of Golos Mitzrayim and Golos Mitzrayim have a special Segula L'Chaper Ovain. One of the strange Taniyos is brought in Siman Reish Mem Tes Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Erev Shabbos. Many have a minute to fast on Erev Shabbos. What is that about? 3 different approaches. The Beis Yosef maintains, Kedei Sheyochel Suda Shabbos Litli Ovain. So it's essentially by nature not really a fast day. It's just merely Sheyochel Suda Shabbos Litli Ovain, but that's a shtickle pele. Because the only real source we find in Shas, Sheyochel Suda Shabbos Litli Ovain, is the very first Mishnah Perek HaRav Psochim, in Psochim Daf Tzadik Tes. And even there, it's only in the afternoon, Sheish Shuas V'Lamala, and it's only a Sudas Kva. But you don't fast on Erev Pesach. You can eat, even in the afternoon, you just don't eat a Sudas Kva, Sheish Shuas V'Lamala. So it's not reasonable that Erev Shabbos, that is not found in the Mishnah, we are machmir far more than on Erev Pesach, Sheyochel Matzah Litli Ovain. I come back to the Meiri. Another fascinating concept. So the Meiri has a sefer Mogen Avos, which very few people are familiar with. Mogen Avos Kishmoi Keinhu. And the Mogen Avos and the Meiri is out to defend Minag Avoisov, and that's why he called the sefer Mogen Avos. So the Sfardim were mezalzel in Minhogei Ashkenaz and Minhogei Tzorfas. So the Meiri wrote a sefer Mogen Avos to defend the Minhogim of Gedolei Tzarfat HaKadmonim. And in Hu Inyan Hu Esrim Vishloisho, he discusses the minhag to fast on Erev Shabbos. And he writes, the source of this minhag is because Erev Shabbos they did Chazorah and everything they learned all week in the yeshivas. So they didn't have time to eat. They needed to dedicate the day to learning, and they didn't have time to eat, and that's the source of the fast of Erev Shabbos. In today's yeshivas, I think they could do Chazorah on Erev Shabbos and eat 3 big meals, Suda Shloimeh B'Shato, and they could go to the beach. Don't need 45 minutes to do Chazorah and everything that they learned throughout the week. Obviously, in the yeshivas of their days, it was different. It was a different derech halimud, and if they wanted to chazar everything they learned in the other 5 days of the week, they didn't have time to eat. And that is why they fasted Erev Shabbos according to the Meiri and Sefer Mogen Avos or Inyan or Eslam Mishloisha. But I think that the Kaf HaChaim is right. So who am I to say? The Meiri is not right, the Beis Yosef is not right. But the Kaf HaChaim brings sources from the Mekubalim. That just like Erev Rosh Chodesh is a day which is Mesugal HaKaporas Ovain, Erev Shabbos is the same. And that is the source of this fast. And I wonder about the Mishnah Berurah, because in Reish Nun, he writes that Erev Shabbos is a day that's Mesuga L'Tshuva V'Kapora. So why doesn't he associate it with Reish Mem Tes? Just one little simon between them. And why wouldn't that be the explanation of the minig to fast on Erev Shabbos? So why do I think the Kaf HaChaim is right? Because the source of this minig is in Yerushalmi, Mesechet Talis, Yud Beis Omud Beis. And what we find there in Yerushalmi is Rabbi Yonason used to fast every Erev Rosh Hashanah. Rav Ovan fasted every Erev Shabbos. So the fact that in Yerushalmi these two minhagim come together, B'chod Machta, Torch Kedei Dibur, proves that these two fast days are of the same essence and the same nature. To me, that's a milsa de pshita. It goes without saying. So if the Yerushalmi says that the Yonason fasted Erev Rosh Hashanah and Rav Ovan fasted Erev Shabbos, that's not because he did Chazorah or Kedei Shiyochel Teyavon. If Chazal and the Yerushalmi, Tanis Yud Beis, bring together these two Tzoymois, Taniyos, then obviously they are the same. So Erev Shabbos belongs to the list of Tanis L'Chaper Avon. Yes?
How does the Rav explain the Shmonesrei Yom Kapara Lechol Toldotav? Rosh Chodesh is described as Yom Kapara. Is it connected to Yom Kippur Katan, or was it Yom Kapara? In what way was it observed as Yom Kapara?
I definitely think it has to do with Yom Kippur Katan, which is actually Erev Rosh Chodesh, but the Tefillah does indicate that there is something about... Actually, I think, tshuva is such a basic theme in Yiddishkeit, in Yahadus. And in the continuity of today's Shia, I will try to explain that almost every Tanis, even the ones of Ritzui and Avelis, come back to tshuva, and tshuva is such a basic thing. I think every day of Eschatzus should be celebrated, and we should have tshuva before that day of Eschatzus, and that is what brings together Erev Shabbos, and Erev Rosh Chodesh, and Erev Rosh Hashanah. Whenever we want to renew our spirits, we should first fast in every day of renewal. And that is Erev Shabbos and Erev Rosh Chodesh and Erev Rosh Hashanah. So I think, yes, that has to do with Rosh Chodesh as a day of Kippur. And if it's a day of Kippur, we before the Kippur, we do tshuva. And that is the same of Erev Rosh Chodesh. Yes. And that is the source of Rosh Chodesh. And that is the Kapora for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that's a different concept which we won't touch about today. So let's go on and have Taniyos Yochid, which are also associated with Tshuva and Kapora. So starting off on a happy note, Chosin L'Kala B'Yom Chiposa. That's a minig Ashkenazi. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring it, but the Ramah brings it twice in Shulchan Aruch. Orechaim Tov Kufayin Gimel and Even Ezer Simen Samach Aleph. The earliest source are Mahari Brona and Maharam Mintz. Both were later Rishonim Migedolei Ashkenaz. And the Ramah brings this minig twice, as I mentioned, in Even Ezer and in Orechaim. And the Maharam Mintz gives two different explanations. One is the Chosn might become drunk, and that will be very unpleasant. He might not be able to say the brachas properly. He might not have proper kavana for the kiddushin. But the other reasoning of Maharam Mintz is because the Yerushalmi in Masechet Bekurim says Chosin b'yom kuposa in moichla loy kol aveinoi. So it's his personal day of atonement. It's like his personal Yom Kippur, and therefore, as we fast on Yom Kippur, Chosin, and many say the Kala as well, should fast b'yom kuposa. So once again, this is a Tanis, which is associated with Tshuva and Kapora Sohain. When a person is Nichshal Ba'avero, he has to fast. And that's brought in the Ramah 3 times in Shulchan Aruch. Orechaim, Shin Lamed Dalet Siv Chavov, Hilchos Nida, Kuf Pei Hei Siv Dalet, and once again in Dina Yayin Esach. Once again, Minig Ashkenaz. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring it, but the Ramah does. Because the early source is Sefer HaRokeach, was one of the early Hasidei Ashkenaz. So if a person is Nichshel Vaveda, he needs to fast. Chilul Shabbos 40 days, Bias Nida 40 days. When will he eat? If every Aveda demands 40 days of fasting. So in later generations, we don't do that. But once again, this is a source brought in the Poskim in which we see that fasting is associated with Kapara Zavai. You all very well know that when a sefer falls to the ground, the minhag is that the entire congregation fasts. Shouldn't happen, but it happens. And I dealt with this question at least 20 or 25 times. Not long ago in Yerushalayim, they opened the Oren Kodesh on a Monday, and a sefer came tumbling out. Obviously, that person that put the sefer into the Oren Kodesh didn't position it properly. So, the source of this minhag is in Hilchos Tefillin, Siman Mem Daled. And I realized that the Divrei Chaim and the Avnei Nezer, two were giants in Torah, but they also happened to be leaders of Hasidic movements. The Divrei Chaim was the Rebbe of Tzanz, the Avnei Nezer was the Rebbe of Safetchov. Chuvas Divrei Chaim Yerodei Chelek Semenuntes tells a troubling story about people that got up in a town in Poland early in the morning. They davened Vesikin, and when they came to shul, they saw a Sefer Torah torn to shreds in the trash basket outside the shul. And obviously Gentile neighbors broke into the shul in the middle of the night. They opened the Oren Kodesh, they desecrated and destroyed the Sefer Torah, and the Divrei Chaim paskins that the entire congregation needs to fast. Contrary to the Divrei Chaim, that the Tshuva in Avnei Nezer, I think it's Shin Ches or Shin Mem in Yerodei, or maybe Shin Yud Ches, and the Avnei Nezer deals with a person that dropped the Sefer Torah by the Akofis, and the Avnei Nezer differentiates. If he's the Gabbai, then the entire Kehillah has to fast, because he's a Shliach Tzibur. But if he's an individual, and he's a Kofi, he dropped the Sefer, then only he has to fast, because the others don't bear responsibility. So the Avnei Nezer's understanding is that the fast, when a Sefer Torah is dropped, is to make up and atone for the Avera of Bizui Sefer Torah. And therefore, the question is, who is responsible? So if he is a Shliach Tzibur, the entire Tzibur is responsible. Why? Do you remember a Mishnah in Masechet Brachos? Shliach Tzibur Sheto'o Simen Ra L'Sholcha Mepnei She'omru Shlicho Shalom K'moisai. So when a Sefer falls, Simen Ra. So if he's a Shliach Tzibur, entire community. If he's a Yochid, simple. So what would the Avnei Nezer paskin in the case of the Divrei Chaim? Let the Gentiles fast. Why the Jews? They did it. Nobody bears responsibility. So according to the Divrei Chaim, it's not about atonement for the Aveira of busy Sefer Torah. It's a siman min hashamayim, that there's midas adin on the community, on the congregation. Shofach hamosoi ala Sefer Torah. Because the Sefer Torah is the most holy possession we have today. We don't have the Beis HaMikdash, we have our shuls, and the Sefer Torah is the holiest object that we can ever have. So when the Sefer Torah is Magira Debesoyin, it's a siman of Midas Adin upon the community. That's the approach of the Divrei Chaim, and the Avnei Nezer says, no, it depends on who bears direct responsibility. Last source regarding Tshuva is a story. Not a Dioraisa, not a Debona, not a Minag. Story. Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, who always come together in Shas. Friends and foes, not foes, but sometimes Barei Plukta in Arocha. So they had a very heated and animated argument of Bo Mitzialam and Gimel, and then they both fasted. Each of them was afraid maybe he was offensive, maybe he hurt the feelings of the other, and they both were Mekabel Tanis. What is that about? L'chapei Rovai. So I brought about, I didn't count, but somewhere close to 15 sources regarding tshuva. And the common denominator is fast because tshuva and kapora savai. Ritzui, category number 2. So there's an entire Perek in Masechet Taanis and a Siman Shulchan Aruch Tzoros on the tzibur, famine, plague, an epidemic. There's a very elaborate and detailed system of tefillas and ta'aniyos, how we start off and how we build up the tension and the tzoim and the inui, and we blow the shofars and we fast and we daven chov dalet broches. It has a shaykhus with tshuva, but essentially it's not tshuva, it's ritzui. When we come to appease HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to ask Him to fulfill our prayers and to hearken to our wishes and our pain and our suffering, and we want to be ma'or rachamei shamayim, that's the method leratzot pnei elyon, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we should be moitze chayin be'enei Hashem, and He should respond to our tefillas. That is ritzui. And we find a similar concept, which definitely hasn't to do with tshuva, and that is anshe mamed and anshe mishmar. So every day, 2 korbanos were brought in the Beis HaMikdash, and I think, wasn't it Parshas Pinchas when we discussed the Tmidim, Tomit Shel Shachar, Tomit Shel Bein Arbaim? So in Tanis Daf Chavav, we learn about anshe mamed, that used to come together, but Ayoros Yisrael, designated people. And they davened, Shakarbonis Yaru L'Rotzan, and they fasted. And Anshe Mishmar came together and they fasted. Al Iborois Shelo Tepalnov Loidosayan, Al Yordeyam, Al Horche Midboriois, they should come home safely, and they fasted. It wasn't about tshuva. They didn't need to do tshuva. It's about the ritzui. So those that daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be makabel arachmim v'larotz in the karbonis. We're not even dealing with the chatas. We're dealing with the oilas hashacha and the oilas shel bein arbaim. But when you come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when you ask for rachamim, one of the greatest gulas is fasting. And that is a concept of ritzui. In Semetov Kuf Ayin Ches, Mi sheyesh lechoyle b'toich beisoy, the minig is to fast. What's the earliest source? Sefer Shmuel, David HaMelech. When Nosen HaNavi tells David that your son is going to die, and he falls ill, David fasts. Did he do tshuva? Probably. Kodesh Baruch Hu was angry with him. But the psukim clearly indicate that the fast was tefillah, more than tshuva. And when the child died, David HaMelech says, let's eat. Bring the bread. And then he is asked, you fasted when your son was alive, and now when he's dead, you're going to eat? And David explains, yes, as long as he was alive, we davened, and we hoped, and we fasted. But now, when at tefillas we're not niskabel, we might as well eat. If it's all about tshuva, you need to do tshuva now more than before. So it's obvious that mi sheyesh lechoyle b'toich beisoy, the tanis is ritzui. We ask for rachamei shamayim. And when you ask for rachamei shamayim, the sgula is fast. And that is anshe mamed v'anshe mishmar. And that is tzoros shel rabim. So I mentioned the minhag that a chosen and a kala fast on the day of the wedding. But the Darkei Moshe writes that so do the parents fast. So why do the parents fast? If the father of the chosen or the kala is going to get drunk, it's not nice, but his choice. I recently heard a chassan in New York, and I already expressed my dismay about what's happening in the yeshiva world, in America and here as well. Young boys, alcohol abuse, and they drink whiskey, and this is an awful minhag. In Beis Yisrael, we knew for hundreds of years that a Jew drinks wine b'kedusha v'avdalta. Chayavodam l'koyes u'dosa l'yayin. This is a new phenomenon in our machna. The young kids become drunk at chasanas, think it's a disgrace, it's a harp and a busha. So I just heard that the father of the kala was drunk by the time of the Siddur condition, and he didn't participate in his daughter's chuppah, because he became drunk before that. He didn't have time to wait for the mitzvah dance. He did it before the chuppah. I hope by the time it got to the mitzvah dance he was sober. I don't know. So, why would the parents of the chosan and kala fast? They don't have this gula of moichna loikol avenoisav. So in my opinion, the chosan fast because of mechilas avonis. The parents fast because they have so much to ask for. So the young kids sitting here don't know yet. But all of us that married off children know what a special day that is and how much we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu shazivug yale yafa shenere doris yishorim mevorachim. They should have shalom bayis and a life of happiness and hatzlacha. So I think the parents fast because they daven, and that is etzom shel ritzui. So we are in the 3 weeks. So you all remember the great tzaddik in the days of the Chorban that fasted 40 years. And that's the story told in Gittin Daf Nun Vav. Reb Tzadok fasted 40 years, and he davened every day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should salvage the Beis HaMikdash. They knew Beruach HaKodesh that the Beis HaMikdash will ultimately be destroyed. Shloim HaMelech knew, Yashiyahu HaMelech knew, and he concealed, he hid the Oroin. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew, and Reb Tzadok knew. And he davened, and he fasted 40 years that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be merachim and salvage the Beis HaMikdash. Did he do tshuva? Probably. He was such a great tzaddik, probably he did tshuva every minute. But the Tanyos were not about tshuva, they were about ritzui. And last on my list, do you recall the Amoida that fasted 100 days and he had a very strange bakosha? Such a strange bakosha that obviously he understood that without 100 Tanyos, not much chance that his bakosha will be fulfilled. So does anybody remember who he was? Rav Zera, Bava Metzia Pehei. When Rav Zera was Oilam Abovali Eretz Yisrael, he fasted 100 days and he asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu he should forget everything he learned in Bavel. Strange. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfill such a strange bakosha? You want to forget what you learned? Why would a person want to forget? But Rav Zera only wanted Torah Eretz Yisrael. So he fasted 100 days to forget what he learned in Bavel. Was that about tshuva? What exactly does he need to do tshuva for? That he learned a lot of Torah in Bavel? Avelis? Avelis about what? That he was zoicha to come to Eretz Yisrael, which is a huge simcha. No Avelis, no tshuva, ritzui. And in that very same blat in Bava Metzia Pehei, we learned about Rabbi Yosef that fasted 40 days. Shelo yishtakich terosoi. Interesting, tu ameron. One fast he wants to forget, and the other fast he should not forget. Caused some confusion out there by the Malachim. What's happening with these Bnei Yisrael? This tzaddik is davening, he wants to forget what he learned. That tzaddik is davening, he should not forget. So maybe we transfer the Torah from Reb Zera to Reb Yosef, and we'll solve the problem. So Reb Yosef fasts 40 days he shouldn't forget. Another 40 days that his children shouldn't forget, and another 100 days that his Einiklach shouldn't forget. Why for the Einiklach 100? Because he probably had 10 times as many Einiklach than kids. So he needed to give more Tanios. And then for the 4th generation, the Gemara says no more need. Kol shehu Talmid Chochem v'beno Talmid Chochem v'ben beno Talmid Chochem shovein HaTorah Persekes Mezarek. So what were these Tanios? So when we have outstanding bakoshes for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, an outstanding pleas, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu should fulfill our prayers. This gula is Tanis. So we brought 7 sources. Tanis Shel Ritzui, Avelos. Obviously, Shavuos B'Tamis, Tisha B'Av, Asor B'Tevis, and Tzom Gedalia. Described by the Navi, Perek Ches of Zechariyahu, Tzom HaRavi'i, Tzom HaChamishi, Tzom HaShvi, Tzom HaSiri, Yira Beis Yisrael, Asosin, Urasim, Kol HaMoadim Toivim. What are these signs? Avelos. So the Chassam Sofer, Tshuvas Orach Chaim Reish Ches says, there's no such a thing as a tzom of Avelos. An oval doesn't fast. An oval can eat. An oinen can eat. He just doesn't need bosav yayin. So the Some Sofer says there is no such a thing as a tzoym of avelis. Every tzoym is only tshuva. Only tshuva. And in days of avelis, we need to do tshuva. Could I have a Rambam zmanim? And if it's 2 volumes, I need zmanim beis. So the Rambam in Hilchos Ta'aniyos, Perek Hey and Perek Aleph definitely says yes. When we fast, it's all about tshuva. And even the Dalet Tzoymes, Tzoym Raviv and Tzoym Chamishi, about tshuva. Who folded this page? Interesting. Maybe I did a year ago. Hope not. So the Rambam writes, Perek Hey Aloha Aleph, Hilchos Ta'aniyos, Yesh Shav Yomim, Shekol Yisrael Mes'anem Bem Mepnei HaTzores She'iru Behem, Kedei La'oirer HaLavois V'Leftoyach B'Darkei HaTshuva. And the Rambam goes out to enumerate and count Tisha B'Av, Shavuos HaBetamaz, Asor HaBeteves, Tzom Gedalia. So the Rambam clearly writes, Mepnei HaTzores She'iru, Kedei La'orer HaLavois V'Leftoyach. So some service says it's all about tshuva. And I say no. The reason we fast is avelis. The tachlis of the fast is tshuva. And that's not a contradiction. Yesham yomim shekol Yisrael mesanim bem mepnei hatzores she'iru behem. But what is the objective? What do we want to achieve by fasting? But the reason we fast is avelis. And bedaku su'inyan, it's not a stira. So some Sofer says, but fasting is always about tshuva. But we already proved that that is not so. Fasting is also ritzui. It's not only tshuva. So as I said before, tshuva is maybe the most fundamental theme in Yiddishkeit. The recognition, which is on one hand a burden, on the other hand it's so comforting, and we have so much chizuk out of the recognition and the understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu always loves us, v'lo yudach mimeni nidach, and He always waits with open arms for us. Shuvu bolim shevavim, erpo mushuvosom. So tshuva is such a central theme. Yes. In these days of mourning, we need to do tshuva. If Chazal say kol shelo nivne beis hamikdash b'yom av maran olav kele hu achriva, we need to do tshuva. But the fast is first and foremost an expression of tzar and avelos. And we find the same yom shemeis bo yoviv, yom shemeis bo rabbi. That is once again a din in Shulchan Aruch. Yom shemeis b'yover tov kuf sameches and orchaim and shina involved in Yerodei, bought twice in Shulchan Aruch. To me, it's a big tell why most people today don't fast when they have Yortzeit. Because in Gemara and in Shulchan Aruch, nobody argues against the halacha. It's halacha pshuta yom shemeis b'yover, we fast. Not only Hasidim don't fast, and instead of fasting, they bring a bottle of mashka and some cookies and shul, and they eat, and everybody says l'chaim. Rabbi Kiva Eiger, Milano Godol, and as in Savoy, he writes, he doesn't want his children to fast on his yortzeit, they only should learn Torah. That's in the Savoy of Rabbi Kiva Eiger. Neither the Chazon Ish nor the Stipler fasted when they had yortzeit. So my fundamental feeling is that our minig is not to fast on Taniyos Yochad, only on Taniyos Tziva. That is why we don't fast Tanas Chaloim when we have a bad dream on Shabbos. The minig is not to fast Mishiyesh Lechoyle B'Torch Beisoy. So any Tanis, which is a Tanas Yochid, our minig is not to fast. Same by Yortzeit. So the Yekes do fast when they have Yortzeit, but most of the others don't. But what is Yom Shemeis V'Yovav? It's an expression of Avelis, an expression of mourning. So I am aware that the Leket Yosha writes, Yom Shemeis V'Yovav, there's Midas Adin, and that is why we fast. So one could once again argue it's about tshuva. It's a Midas Adin, so you need to do tshuva. But fundamentally, I think, yes, there is a concept, tzoim shel avelos. We need to do tshuva. But the direct kesher is avelos. So there's a siman Shulchan Aruch Chaim Tov Kuf Pei. Elu yomim she'iru behem tzoros lavoseinu v'ra'ui lehis'anois behem. The Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is ra'ui. He doesn't even write na'agu. Ra'ui. And then there's a long list. And Baruch Hashem, that list stopped somewhere 1,000 years ago. If that list would continue up to this very day, Tov Kuf Pei would be the biggest siman in Dalet Chalka Shulchan Aruch. So Baruch Hashem, they stopped that list more than 1,000 years ago. What we've been through and what we endured in these last 1,000 years, that would be a very, very long list, culminating with the greatest tragedy in human history, which is the Holocaust. So what are these days about? Is it tshuva? Not necessarily. Because yes, Dalet Tzoymes have significance l'doros olam. But would we say, in France, they burn Yud Gimel Sifrei Torah, Yud Gimel Koines Sifrei Torah. Does that day, is it a day of infamy? Is it a day that has Midas Adin? Every day in which Jews were hurt? Is that a day l'doros olam? That's a Raya Mazle? I don't think so. So fasting on these days is an expression of grief. Yes, we never forget our past. Jews always remember their past. The great days of joy and the days of tragedy. That's a basic theme in Yiddishkeit. So this is once again a tzoim shel avelos. It's not ritzui, we don't have any special bakoshas on these days. But it's an expression of grief, of sadness, of mourning. So I do think there's a geder tzoim shel avelos. Number 4, zeicher. And that's the shortest list. Only 2. Not even 2. 1.5. What is Tanis Esther? Many people mistakenly think that the easiest Tanis is Tzoim Gedalia. Tzoim Gedalia is a Tanis Chomo. Just like Shavuos B'Tammuz and Asora B'Tevis. Tanis Esther has no source in Shas, neither Bavli nor Yerushalmi. It's the youngest and the most recent Tanis, which is a Tanis Choivos, Tanis Esther. It was instituted in the days of the Geonim. La'acha chasim es Talmud. But what is it about? Avelos? No tragedy happened in Tanis Esther. To the contrary. Asher v'nahafachi, asher yishletu hayudim hemo b'seineim. La'asis din b'mevakshei ra'osam. That was Yud Gimel Adar. In Megillas Tanis, it is called Yom Nikanor, which is a day, which is a Yom Tov. Do we have any special bakoshas? No. We say slichas, but if we fast, we might as well take advantage and say slichas. But it's not about tshuva. It's not a day of tshuva. We don't have any special bakoshas. Definitely no avelis. So what is it about? Zeicher. Zeicher to what? People have a mistake and they think zeicher to the fast days that were decreed by Mordechai Esther. No, the Mishnah Berurah Tafresh Pevov explains that in days of yore, when Klal Yisrael went out to wage war, they fasted. Moshe Rabbeinu fasted when he went out to Melchemes Midian. That's a medrash. So in Yud Gimel Adar, which was the designated day, Lehinokem me oiveyem, they fasted that they should be victorious, minimal bloodshed, and it is a zeicher to that fast day of Yud Gimel Adar that we fast Yud Gimel Adar. So we fast today in remembrance of their fast, in which merit they had Nisan. So what's the other one? Tanis B'chorim. Strange Tanis. Instead of fasting, you bring a bottle of whiskey and a basket of cookies and shuls, and you make a siyum. You don't even have to make a siyum. You listen to a siyum, and me'es them and drink them a lot of oil. Strange Tanis. What is the origin? And the rationale of this Tanis exactly the same as Tanis Esther. So the Kolbo explains Then in those days, in days of yore, the minig by idol worshippers was that the b'chorim of every family, they were the ones to offer the sacrifices to Avodah Zorah. And Golas Mitzrayim, many Jewish families were nitfas l'Avodah Zorah, and Jewish b'chorim were makav korbanos l'Avodah Zorah. And then when they saw and witnessed the Esamakas and Kriyas Yamsef and Yetzias Mitzrayim, they all did tshuva, and the b'chorim fasted l'chapei rovim. And that is why b'chorim fast today. Zecher etanas b'chorim b'yemei geulas Mitzrayim. So in essence, it's exactly the same as Tanas Esther. Erev Purim and Erev Pesach. They fasted, and so do we. So how would we react if a person would come Tanas Esther to shul with a bottle of schnapps and a box of cookies and make a siyum and give everyone to eat? I don't think we would throw him out of shul. We don't throw people out of shul, but we would politely put our arm on his shoulders and move him out. So what's the difference between Tanas B'chorim and Tanas Esther? This proves the relevant and power of minhagim. In essence, they're the same. But the minig in Tanas B'chorim is for hundreds of years that we do a siyum and you eat. The minig Tanas Esther is that you fast. Well, maybe the difference is that the minig of Tanas B'chorim is only B'chorim, not the entire community, but still, Tanas B'chorim has a source in Yerushalmi. So it's Chomer Yoiser Metanas Esther. But that's the minig. So there are only two Taniyos that are essentially Zeich. So we have Tshuva, Ritzui, Avelis, and Zeich. One more on my list, which I don't know how to define. And that's a Gemara Sanhedrin Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Brought in the Rambam Perik Yud Gimel and Hilchos Sanhedrin. When a Beis Din is done, a person Lemisa, Dalad Misa's Beis Din, they need to fast on that day. And the Gemara bases this halacha on the Posuk Lo Toichlu Al Adam. Many Achroinim feel it's a D'Rabbanan and it's an Asmachta. But the Maggid Mishnah, Perek Yudim and Hilchos Sanhedrin writes, Rosh and Rambam Mashmetz Diurais, it's a Droshe Gemura Lo Toichlu Al Adam. So that would be the only other one besides Yom Kippur that might be a Diurais. What is it about? I don't know. Because it's not a D'Rabbanan. Chazal based it on apostle. And we'd have no explanation either in the Gemara nor in them. It might be tshuva. Maybe the Dionim have to be choishish. Who knows? Maybe we had a mistake. We're human. And humans are fallible. Shgias miyot. We did our best. It's a Sanhedrin shel Chav Gimel, not Shloisha. You need 23 Dayanim to deal with Chai v'Mises Beis Din. So maybe it's tshuva. Maybe the Beis Din fasts because v'hu rachu michaper ovan. If we pass mistake in judgment and we take a person's life. Maybe it's ritzui. Maybe it's their responsibility to daven. Shiyahei misosoi kaparosoi. Leilui nishmosoi. They were the one to pass verdict. They were the one to need to daven for him. Maybe it's Avelus. We are the ones that bear responsibility for his demise, so we need to mourn. Don't know. Might be tshuva, might be ritzvah, might be Avelus. Definitely not Zeichel. So that's the last one on my list. So I didn't really count, but I think on my list I have 28 sources. I think I skipped some. So this is Divrei Hatzoymes Vezakosam.
Maybe the difference between Ta'anit Esther and Ta'anit B'chorim is that Ta'anit B'chorim is a private Ta'anit Yachid. It's only Yachidim who have to fast.
Yes, and I mentioned that before. It's not exactly like other Tanis Yochad. Other Tanis Yochad, the reasoning and the motive of the tzom is a personal experience. You had a bad dream. Those are defined as Tanis Yochid. After all, this is a Tanis that goes back 2,000 years. And it's a communal Tanis. Not for everyone for B'chorim, but all the B'chorim. So it's not exactly a Tanis Yochid. I mentioned before that we We aren't makbid in Tanis Yochid. But it's more of a Tanis Yochid than Tanis Esther. So maybe that also would be an additional explanation why Tanis B'chol we don't really fast and Tanis Esther we do. So I think this is a fascinating topic and a fascinating shir just to have a broad overview of. I think I mentioned almost all the tzaymis that we find, the Weiss and the Kabbalah, the Rabbanan, Minhagim, and stories like Reb Zera and Reb Yosef and Reb Tzodek and Reb Huna and Reb Chizda, which aren't really halachas or Minhagim, but individual stories that we find when Gedolei Yolam fasted and the reason that they fasted. So last week's Haftarah, we read the Perek Aleph in Novi Yirmiyahu. And in Yirmiyahu Novi's first revelation, Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him, Terem atzulchu mibeta Novi nesaticho bagoyim. Then Kodesh Baruch Hu asked Yirmiyahu, Ma atu roya? And he says, Makel shoked ani roya. And Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Zerach Weiss ki shoked ani al dvori la'asoisoi. So the remez is the word, the way we hear the word. Shaked, shoked. In Yerushalmi, we have an additional interpretation. Perek Daled Mesechet Tanis, the end of the Yerushalmi Mesechet Tanis. So the Yemei Chanota of Shkedim is 21 days. That's what it takes to blossom from flower to fruit. Keneged Chof Alaf Yoim, from Shavuos Betamis to Tisha B'Av. Tzorech because in the first Beis Hamikdash it was 30 days. The Gemara says, Hufko Ir B'Tes Tammuz. Shavuos Betamis is second Beis Hamikdash. And Yirmiyahu was in the days of the first Beis Hamikdash. Why wouldn't it be Chof Alaf Yoim? Tzorech Loim. The Remes is the Doire Soilem, not for him. And the Doire Soilem, the fast will be from Shavuos Betamis the Tisha B'Av, not from Tes Tammuz, like Tisha. I have my own pshat, rather two pshat. Makel Shoked and Yeroya. Venit Nerishos. So Yirmiyahu was a great Navi, and it was his misfortune to have the duty of being with Klal Yisrael in the most difficult and challenging and traumatic time of Chorban Beis Hamikdash. And according to Chazal, Yirmiyahu wrote Megillas Eicha. And there's a perek in Megillas Eicha in which the Navi laments not only the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but his own personal misfortune. And he says, Ani hagever ra'oni b'shevet avrosoi. So Yirmiyahu is together with Klal Yisrael, loving and comforting and challenging and giving divrei teichocha. So my feeling is that Kodesh Baruch Hu gives a remes to Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu, my dear Navi, I know how hard this is going to be for you, and how painful it will be to be together with Klal Yisrael and see their torment and their torture and their pain and suffering and the bloodshed and the oceans of tears. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the very outset of this ordeal, gives them divrei chizuk. Ma atu roya, makel shoked ani roya. First perek of Masechet Masres, also brought in Chul and Daf Chov Daled. The Mishnah says that shkedim tchilos an mar v'soif an mosik. And that is a remez about the Golos. Yes, the Golos is tragic, and it's painful. And it's unique in the annals of human history. No other people had one Golos and another and another. And we're here, we prevail, but so much pain and so much suffering throughout the ages. Tchilos and mar, v'soif and mosik. So when Rabbi Kiva and his great friends, Shuv pa'amachas hoya oilon liYerushalayim, the end of Masechet Makos, Kivan she'egiu lebeis kodesh hakodeshim, ra'o shu'al yoytzim kodesh hakodeshim, they saw a fox scampering out of kodesh hakodeshim, v'tchilu hem boichem v'Rabbi Kiva metzachik, and they asked him, what exactly are you laughing about? What makes you happy? And he asked them, va'atam mipnei ma atam boichem, מוקם שכוסה בו ועזר הקורב יומס ועכשיו שואלים הלכו בו ולא נבכה. And Rabbi Akiva says, לקח אני מצחק. And the Maharal has a marvelous and amazing idea, and he emphasizes what is lekach ani mitzachik. Rabbi Akiva says the very same reason that brings you to heartbreak and to tears makes me happy. Why is that? So the Maharal says it's a chok b'hanhoges u'olam. The glory of every geula is directly dependent on the depth and the tragedy of the Golas which preceded it. And that is why the Beis HaMikdash HaRishon was more glorious and more magnificent than the Bayis HaSheni. Because Golas Mitzrayim was 400 years and Golas Babel was a mere 70 years. I don't know how it fits in with the Yerushalmi and Masechet Sukkah that Golas Babel was more painful than Golas Mitzrayim. But Golas Mitzrayim was longer than Golas Babel. And that is why Geulas Mitzrayim was more glorious and more magnificent and Kriyas Yamsuf than Golas Babel, which was very minori, not very glorious and magnificent. The Geula of Babel, when Ezra and Nehemiah brought the people back to Eretz Yisrael. And the Maharal says, we could just imagine a Kal Vachomer, how great and how glorious will be the Geula Shleima after 2,000 years of Golas. And after so much pain and so much darkness and so much gloom and so much suffering, how great the Geula will be. And that is what Rabbi Akiva says, lekach ani mitzach. The very same reason that brings you to cry brings me to joy. And Rabbi Akiva was the one that had the ability to see Ores hageula boikim va'oile metoy cheshkas agoros. Out of the darkness, he sees the light of the Geula. And that is the remez of Makel Shoked Ani Roya Shkedim Tchilos and Mar V'Soif and Mosik. So Minig Ashkenaz is we say Kinnis on Tisha B'Av sitting on the floor like a Vedim. And before the last Kino, Eretzion, we all rise and stand. Why is that? Doesn't it seem strange? Why wouldn't we finish all the Kinnis while we're sitting on the floor? We say Eretzion V'Oreo Kamo Isho B'Tzireho. Isn't that a strange analogy? Wouldn't it be more fitting to say Kamo Isho B'Ovdani Yelodeho? The Mekoinen says no. Kamo Isho B'Tzireho. It's like labor pain. So labor pain really hurts. No one sitting here knows how it hurts. What we know from our wives, from our daughters, from our mothers, hurts. And sometimes women scream out of pain when having a baby. But woe is to the woman that never experienced labor pain. And it is the dream of every Bas Yisrael to feel that pain. Because out of pain comes the greatest simcha in the human experience. Nothing brings us more happiness than children. Bringing children to the world and see them grow. Hearing their laughter and seeing their player. And the Navi says, Yelodam v'yelodois mesachikim b'rechoy v'seu. And that's part of the Chazoin of Achas Hayomi. So it hurts. Labor hurts. But we're happy to bear that pain. Because out of the pain comes the greatest happiness. And out of the pain comes life. And out of that pain comes our future. And the Mekoinen says, Elitzion v'yoreo como isho b'tzireo. And it's not coincidence that Chazal speak about Chevlei Mashiach. In Tanakh, we find Chevlei Leida. Chevlei Mashiach and Chevlei Leida. They have something in common. And that is why we rise when we say Elitzion v'yoreo como isho b'tzireo. Because in the depths of our hearts we feel, yes, Chevlei Mashiach will bring forth light and happiness. And out of the ashes, we will see the Beis HaMikdash restored in greater glory than we ever experienced in the past. And that is why we rise when we say, Elitzion v'yoreo komishu b'tzireo. And maybe that is the remez. Makel shoked ani roya, like shkedim tchilos on mar v'soif on mosik. And then Chazal say that there are shkeidim morim. But even those could be made sweet al yedei ha'ur, yochol ha'matkon al yedei ha'ur. And eish, toil nimshir al eish, halakoi devorei ka'eish ni'um Hashem. So what brought about the churban of the Beis HaMikdash Shalei Baruch Hu b'toiret chilo, alos v'misterosi, nedorim peyarav. The Beis HaMikdash will be restored and rebuilt in the schus of Talmud Torah. That's the other remez in Makel Shoked, Yochel HaMatkon al Yedei HaUr. And at Tfilas Nachem and Tisha B'Av we say, Ki Yatu Hashem be'eish yitzato, hu be'eish ato osed levinaisa. Be'eish yitzato, bitul Torah, koi devorei ke'eish. That was caused the churban, that will bring about salvation, and binyan habayis hashlishi. So let us just once again quote the posuk we mentioned in today's shir, the posuk in Zechariah Perek Ches. Tzoyim haravi v'tzoyim hachamishi v'tzoyim hashvi v'tzoyim ha'asiri yihu lebeis Yehuda lesoson u'lesimchu l'moed im toivim bebias goel tzedek v'mehero v'yomeinu amen. So let us hope. Kol ha'masal Yerushalayim zoiche v'roye b'vinyona. So what should I wish you? A good Yom Tov? Yeah. You shall have good Yom Tov. And maybe till Tisha B'Av, the Beis Mikdash will be restored, and we will all rejoice. Meher Yabona Beis HaMikdash, we should be zeicher to see Bias Goel Tzedek, and Binyan Beis HaMikdash, B'mheiro V'yameinu Amen.